The alarm hit before I even had my boots on. A high, screaming pulse that meant only one thing on this station: hull breach. I was 3 decks below my daughter's school module, and my hands were already shaking before I reached the ladder. "Mira," I said into my comm, over and over, like saying her name enough times would make her answer faster. Nothing came back but static and the pounding of my own feet on the metal grating. By the time I reached her deck, orange emergency lights were flooding the corridor, and 2 Kesrin security officers were pulling scorched panel plating away from a jagged tear in the wall. I pushed past them. I didn't care about protocol. I didn't care about anything except getting to her. I found her on a stretcher, already surrounded by medical staff, her face pale, her eyes wide and glassy with shock. Her left leg was gone below the knee, sealed off, cauterized by the emergency foam the station used for trauma control, but gone all the same. "Daddy," she whispered, and that one word broke something inside me that I don't think ever fully repaired. I rode with her to the medical bay, holding her hand the entire way, telling her she was going to be fine, telling her I was right there, telling her anything I could think of to keep her calm. The Kesrin doctors worked fast, I'll give them that. Within 20 minutes she was stable, sedated, breathing evenly. The bleeding was stopped. The wound was clean. But stable wasn't the same as whole. The lead physician, a tall Kesrin named Dr. Varn, met me outside the recovery room. Kesrin don't have expressive faces the way we do. Their skin is smooth and gray, their eyes large and dark, and when Dr. Varn spoke, there was no anger in his voice, no sympathy either, just flat, clinical calm. "Your daughter's limb cannot be reattached," he said. "The tissue damage is too extensive. We can offer a stabilization cap for the stump and a mobility chair for daily use. Regenerative treatment is not authorized for her case." "Not authorized," I repeated. "Why not?" "Human physiology falls outside our primary treatment matrix. Regenerative therapy requires significant resource allocation. The Concordat Medical Council has determined that non-citizen biological repair is not cost-effective at this station." I stood there, staring at him, waiting for him to say something else, something that made sense. He didn't. To him, the conversation was already over. He had delivered the facts. In his mind, that was compassion enough. I wanted to shout. I wanted to grab him by his coat and demand he explain how a 9-year-old girl's leg could be reduced to a line item on a budget sheet. But shouting wouldn't fix Mira's leg, and neither would rage. So I swallowed it down, every bit of it, and I walked into that recovery room and sat beside my daughter's bed, and I made a decision that would consume every waking hour of the next 6 weeks. I was not going to accept a mobility chair as her future. My name is Daniel Ashford. Before the Concordat opened trade routes and half of Earth scrambled for jobs among the stars, I worked at a small clinic in Ohio, building prosthetic limbs for people who had lost them in accidents, in service, in the simple bad luck of being alive in a dangerous world. It wasn't glamorous work, it didn't pay much, but I was good at it, and I loved it, because every device I built gave someone their life back. Nobody had ever told me a leg wasn't cost-effective, not until that night. The next morning, I requested access to the station's fabrication archive. Most of what the Kesrin had on file was built around their own biology: 4 limbs of equal length, joints that rotated in ways human joints never could, nerve structures nothing like ours. None of it was designed for a human body. All of it was, in theory, useless to me. I didn't care. I started pulling apart everything I could get my hands on. The station's recycling bay was full of decommissioned equipment nobody wanted. Servo motors too small for Kesrin cargo loaders, actuator housings stripped from broken maintenance drones, spools of conductive filament meant for repairing exoskeletal braces. Technically, it was all garbage. Nobody stopped me from taking garbage. I set up a workspace in an unused storage bay on the lower deck, dragged in a cot so I wouldn't waste time walking back to quarters, and requested every archived file on human prosthetic engineering that Earth's relay could send. The signal took 11 hours each way at our distance from home. I spent those hours pacing, sketching designs on a tablet, running simulations that kept failing, because none of the Kesrin components were built to interface with human nerve signals. The first week, I barely slept. Mira didn't want to talk about the leg at all. She would look away whenever I mentioned it, curl up on her side in the medical bay bed, and stare at the wall. I understood. She had woken up from surgery already missing part of herself. No amount of promises from her father could undo that overnight. I didn't push her. I just kept working where she could see me through the observation window, kept explaining out loud what I was building, even when she wasn't listening, because I needed to believe it myself as much as I needed her to hear it. It was on day 9 that she finally asked a question. "What does that part do?" she said, pointing through the glass at a small motor housing on my workbench. "This is going to help your knee bend," I told her, "so you can walk again." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Will it hurt?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I'm still figuring it out. But I promise you, I am not going to stop until it works." That was the moment something shifted between us. She started asking more questions. She started giving feedback when I brought test pieces to fit against her stump. She told me the socket pinched here, felt too tight there, and her feedback made the design better than anything in my archive files ever could. I wasn't the only one who noticed what I was doing. A young Kesrin technician named Ayra caught me hauling a crate of stripped motors through the corridor one night. She was younger than most of the staff I had met, with a curiosity in her eyes that the older Kesrin seemed to have lost somewhere along the way. "Why are you performing manual biomechanical fabrication?" she asked. "Automated regenerative solutions exist for compatible biologies." "My daughter isn't a compatible biology," I said. "So I'm building a human solution." She followed me back to my workspace. I expected her to report the unauthorized use of station materials. Instead, she picked up one of my failed nerve interface boards and studied it for a long time. "Your signal filtering is inefficient," she said finally. "Our own dampener technology, if retuned, could isolate human muscle signals with far greater precision than what you are attempting here." I hadn't expected help. I certainly hadn't expected it from a Kesrin. But I was desperate, and desperate people take help wherever it comes from. "Show me," I said. She came back the next night, and the night after that. Ayra never fully understood why I was doing this the way I was doing it. Efficiency wasn't my goal. Cost-effectiveness had nothing to do with it. But she understood the engineering problem in front of her, and she was brilliant at solving it. And somewhere across those long nights of recalibrating sensor thresholds against the twitch of Mira's remaining thigh muscle, I think she started to understand the reason behind it too. "Your species does not calculate the way we do," she said to me one night, very quietly, almost like a confession. "No," I said, "we don't." The build itself was harder than anything I had ever attempted. Kesrin components weren't designed to read human muscle signals, so every sensor had to be recalibrated by hand. I spent entire nights adjusting thresholds by fractions of a percent, testing them against small twitches in Mira's leg, watching the readout for any sign that the signal was clean. Some nights nothing worked at all. I would sit on the floor of that storage bay at 4 in the morning, surrounded by burned-out circuit boards and half-finished housings, wondering if I was chasing something impossible. But then I would think about Mira's face when she asked if the leg would let her run again, and I would pick the pieces back up and keep going. Word of the project reached station administration by the 5th week. I wasn't hiding it exactly, but I also wasn't asking permission, and unauthorized use of fabrication resources doesn't go unnoticed forever. Dr. Varn was the one who filed the report. I don't think it was out of spite. In his mind, an unsanctioned project pulling resources away from approved allocations was simply an error that needed correcting. I was called into a review with the Station Oversight Council. A panel of 5, 3 Kesrin and 2 humans who worked administrative roles for the Concordat. They laid out the violations plainly: unauthorized material requisition, unlogged fabrication hours, use of restricted technical archives without clearance. "You have 6 days," the lead council member told me. "Either the project is completed and demonstrated to function, or it is shut down and the materials returned to inventory." 6 days. The leg wasn't ready. The gate algorithm still stuttered whenever it detected a change in incline. The battery cell Ayra had scavenged from an old maintenance drone barely held 4 hours of charge before it needed recharging, and Mira, despite all her progress, had never actually stood on the leg for more than a few seconds at a time. We didn't sleep much during those 6 days. Ayra rerouted 3 separate power circuits without asking for any credit for her work. I recalibrated the nerve interface for what felt like the 100th time. Mira, now fully invested in the project, spent hours marking pressure points on a diagram with a stylus, showing me exactly where the socket needed adjusting. On the fifth night, something changed. The signal finally read clean. The knee joint responded to her muscle twitch without delay. I watched the readout hold steady for the first time in 6 weeks, and felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight since the night of the accident. "Try standing," I told her. She gripped the edge of the workbench and pushed herself up. For a moment she wobbled, her balance shifting awkwardly onto the new leg, and my heart climbed into my throat. Then she steadied. She stood there, breathing hard, gripping the bench with white knuckles, and looked down at the leg like she couldn't quite believe it was holding her weight. "It's not hurting," she said, surprised. "That's the idea," I said, though my voice cracked a little when I said it. The 6th day arrived faster than I wanted it to. The council gathered in the storage bay because I refused to move any of the equipment before the final test. Dr. Varn stood at the front, arms folded in that stiff, formal way Kesrin hold themselves when they expect to be proven right. Mira stood at the far end of the bay, holding my arm for support. I could feel her trembling, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of everyone watching her, waiting to see if 6 weeks of work would hold up under pressure. "Whenever you're ready," I told her quietly. "No rush." She let go of my arm. The first step wobbled. My stomach dropped, but she caught her balance, adjusted her weight, and took a second step, steadier than the first, then a third. By the 4th step, she wasn't holding anything at all, just walking, slow and careful, but walking, across the open floor of that storage bay in front of 5 council members who had come there, expecting to shut the whole project down. Nobody said a word. I don't think anyone in that room, myself included, fully believed it was happening until she reached the far wall, turned around, and walked back. Dr. Varn stepped forward and knelt beside her, studying the joint articulation of the leg, with an intensity I hadn't seen from him before. For the first time since the accident, his flat clinical voice actually seemed to hesitate. "This exceeds the mobility benchmarks of our standard prosthetic issue," he said. Not to me, but to the rest of the council, as though he needed to hear himself say it before he could believe it. "It's not standard," I said. "It's hers." The council didn't apologize. I don't think Kesrin culture has much room for that kind of admission. But the violation charges were quietly dropped, and the materials I had used were reclassified as an approved research project, rather than unauthorized use. Within a month, something else started happening. Requests began appearing in the station's technical logs, other families, other species, asking for consultation with the human engineer on the lower deck. It turned out the Concordat's efficient arithmetic had a lot of edge cases it never accounted for, a lot of problems that didn't math out on a budget sheet, but mattered more than anything to the people living through them. Ayra still comes by most evenings now. She tells me she's gathering additional data for future projects, though I suspect she simply enjoys the work. And maybe the company too. We've built 2 more prosthetics since Mira's, for a young Kesrin who lost a limb in a mining accident, and for a visiting trader whose species the medical council had also deemed too costly to treat. Mira runs laps around the arboretum deck most mornings now, slower than she used to, and she still complains that the leg pinches a little on the 3rd lap, but she runs, and every single morning that she does, I remember standing outside that recovery room 6 weeks earlier, terrified that a mobility chair was going to be the rest of her childhood. The Kesrin have databases stretching back thousands of years. They have ships that fold space and medicine advanced enough to regrow entire limbs when the numbers say it's worth doing. What they never understood, not until they watched a 9-year-old girl walk across a storage bay on a leg built from scrap parts and stubborn refusal, is that some problems can't be solved by arithmetic at all. Sometimes the only thing that gets the job done is someone who loves another person enough to build them a miracle out of whatever they can find, and refuse to stop until it works.